Hello everyone, welcome back to Military Aviation History. I'm your host Chris and I have something really special for you today. And that is a summary of the evaluation of the Bf 109 by Japan during World War II and the conclusions they drew from comparison flights between some of their machines and the Bf 109. And this video, well, it comes courtesy thanks to one of you, and that is viewer and Patreon supporter Quaz, who has took it upon himself to translate a lot of the Japanese material and Japanese sources on the subject into English. That is now giving me the chance to relay all this information to you. Yeah, so that's just fantastic, right? Straight out of the original language. That's how we do it here on Military Aviation History. Can it get any better than this? No, I don't think so, unless you have a pot of sauerkraut with you. So yeah, this video, the credit really goes to Quaz. I'm sure you'll appreciate what he's done here because, yeah, it's just fantastic. As you know, it was quite common during World War II for allies and adversaries to test each other's equipment to see whether anything new was out there and if whether anything could be learned from the other's equipment. Now this story is not that different, and when a new breed of German fighter planes came out in the late 1930s, Japan was interested. And the story that I'm going to relate to you today is one that involves the Japanese Army. Its air service was of course distinct from the Japanese Navy's air service, but when it got wind of the Germans developing the Bf 109 as well as the Heinkel 112, well, the Japanese military attaché in Berlin, in Germany, sent a telegram to the army in Japan in September 1939, giving some information on these aircraft and specifically what would be required to import them into Japan. The first telegram, number 373, was about the Bf 109. The 109 model plane of Bayerische Flugzeugwerke has recently been equipped with the Daimler-Benz solid injection engine model 601 and has demonstrated high performance with a maximum horizontal speed of 570 km per hour at an altitude of 4,900 meters. Production rights will not be sold unless accompanied by 30 planes or more, and the price per plane is 260,000 marks. In the future, this aircraft will be the fighter of the German Air Force. And if buying production rights, the price is about 700,000 marks, and if buying 2 or 3 planes as a sample, the price is still 260,000 marks. Then the telegram number 374 was about the Heinkel HE 112. There is an offer from Heinkel to the army for selling 5 HE 112 fighters. The engine is the Daimler-Benz 601. The maximum speed is 570 km per hour at an altitude of 4,500 meters. The climb speed is about 5 minutes to 4,000 meters. It has been reported that the price is 185,000 marks per plane for the purchase of 9 planes, and there is no need to purchase production rights. In response to both of these telegrams, the Army Aviation HQ replied, although the model of the Bayerische Flugzeugwerke is recognized as a valuable research plane, it is regrettable that it cannot be purchased because of its high price. We are aware that the Heinkel 112 already can be obtained for research as the Navy purchased this plane. In short, the Bf 109 was not bought for study because of the price and also the conditions involved, and the Heinkel 112 was already in Japan because the Navy had ordered it and the Army could potentially perhaps ask the Navy to borrow it, if we're being optimistic. A year later, the situation seems to have changed somewhat. A handful of Bf 109s were successfully ordered from Germany in 1940, and arriving in May 1941, they were put together and then were slotted to have a comparison flight and also a dogfight, a simulated dogfight of course, between the Bf 109 and a couple of Japanese army fighters. Let's start with some of the basic information for this test then. This test was conducted in July 1941 and it involved a German Bf 109 E7. The E7 was the last main production variant of the E model of the 109, and by 1941 this was increasingly substituted in the Luftwaffe in Germany, of course, with the newer F model. However, it was still being used as a fighter bomber, and also the E7 would see quite a lot of service amongst some of Germany's European allies. The Japanese army had a specific interest in this test, and it doesn't look like they were actually looking for production licenses. Instead, they just wanted to see how their aircraft currently fare against sort of the modern high-speed fighters that were out there. The Bf-109 in that constellation was merely a substitute for some of the types that Japan, the aircraft types that Japan expected to meet once they launched their offensive in the Southeast Asian and Pacific theater. And that would be mainly then, of course, British and American types. And you've got to remember that in July 1941, Japan is not yet involved in what we Westerners like to call World War II. Instead, they had, of course, already taken territory in Korea and Manchuria way before this, and they had been involved in China. But the sort of that World War II time frame that we like to think about, that only starts for Japan in December 1941 with the attack on Pearl Harbor and, of course, their offensive in Southeast Asia. Before we jump into the comparisons, I thought it would be really interesting to see what the Japanese actually thought about the Bf-109. So let's go into that first, but keep in mind that throughout this video, that the Japanese, when they tested the Bf-109, apparently they had some problems with the engine and it wasn't operating at full performance. So that equates to a slightly worse performance than the E-7 was actually capable of. In July, it flew for the first time at the hands of the pilot Stör, a test pilot from Messerschmitt, and comparison tests were carried out with a Type 79 fighter, the Ki-44, the Ki-45 and Ki-60. As a result, it was judged that the acceleration force was great, but the other performances were not as expected. In particular, dogfight performance, relating to the difference in design philosophy, was said to not be a match for Japanese fighters at all. As a result of comparative tests with the Ki-44 and Ki-60, the Bf-109E easily loses speed when climbing or performing air combat maneuvers. However, the special flight and aerial shooting tests later conducted at the Akeno Army Aviation School clearly displayed various outstanding aspects, such as excellent dive performance and strength of the airframe. Also, the structure proved to be a great reference for mass production. The Bf-109 was then evaluated by the Akeno Flight School. The low speed at landing makes it difficult to lower the tail, and when landing in a horizontal position, bouncing gradually becomes severe and the airframe tilts, scraping the wingtip on the ground. Because it is a phenomenon unfamiliar to Japanese pilots, Akeno made several mistakes and damaged the aileron each time. Captain Aramaki knew the trick to land without bouncing and was praised by the civilian pilot Stör, who came to Japan with the Bf-109. Next to Willy Stör, Germany also sent another pilot, Oberleutnant Fritz Losigkeit, who became the military attaché until January 1942. And it seems that he, at least in the sky, was a little bit of a troublemaker and became the center of quite a few discussions. According to the prevailing view at the time, it was considered that Losigkeit was not familiar with the simulated air battle method on the Japanese side, switching between superiority and inferiority, and the performance couldn't be compared because he ignored the regulations and focused on hit-and-run tactics. However, as far as can be seen from the Ki-27 versus Bf-109 duo, it seems that Losigkeit was conducting the tests in compliance with the rules of the simulated air battles on the Japanese side. Still, some of the Japanese pilots had negative remarks about Losigkeit's performance during these combat trials. Captain Aramaki said, "That troublesome guy. It's pointless because his tactics are different." And this shows you the complexities involved with taking a pilot who's used to a certain combat environment and then putting him in a completely different environment. And add to that, of course, that this is a testing environment now where they're simulating dogfights and essentially telling him what he can and cannot do based on the test parameters that the Japanese are used to. Fritz Losigkeit, well, at this point he had already taken part in the Spanish Civil War. He had been there during the invasion of Poland, the invasion of the Low Countries, the battle for France, and also he has flown during the Battle of Britain, and he's claimed a couple of kills throughout this time. And yeah, he flew the Bf-109 the way he flew it, and he wasn't going to have anybody, I guess, tell him what he can and cannot do with the aircraft. Losigkeit introduced the German-style Rotte Schwarm formation air tactics to the Japanese army. The 2-and-2 4-aircraft platoon maneuver, called the Rotte tactic, was later taken up as a research subject at the Akeno Flight School. Now let's have a look at how the Bf-109 fared against some of the other machines that the Japanese used, well, specifically Japanese Army aircraft, and that was the Ki-27, the Ki-44 and the Ki-60. Now let's have a quick look at the schedule for the simulated dogfights. As you can see, we are only comparing the Bf-109 to Japanese army planes here, starting with the Ki-27, an older model, going over to the newer models of Ki-44 and Ki-60. The Ki-45, which was a twin-engine heavy fighter, was also tested. However, I do not have any specific data on that test. Although somewhat surprising given its ancient look and also its somewhat outdated performance, the Ki-27 actually became quite an important aircraft to test against the Bf-109, and that was because a lot of the Japanese Army's air services squadrons were still equipped with this aircraft, so the Japanese wanted to see how this seemingly outdated machine was going to perform against a more modern high-speed fighter, and these were the conclusions. Overall, it can be seen that the Ki-27 is superior to the Bf-109E only in turning performance. It is impossible for the Ki-27 to take initiative and dogfight unless it is a surprise attack. Even if the Ki-27 succeeded in attacking the Bf-109 from a dominant position, the Bf-109 would be able to pull away and counterattack the Ki-27 regardless of whether it is in level flight, climbing or diving maneuvers by taking advantage of the speed difference. However, if the Ki-27, which excels in turning performance, could be put into a low-altitude dogfight, it seems that it would be possible to achieve victory because the performance advantage of the Bf-109E is confined. Oberleutnant Losigkeit remarked, "I think the Bf-109E can shoot when the Ki-27 tries to turn. The Ki-27 often turns, so I can't dive on it." Captain Sakagawa said, "The Ki-27 has an opportunity to be shot, but has no chance to shoot." So it's interesting, these conclusions were taken with quite a positive spin, since the Ki-27 was still assumed to be able to defend itself, or be able to defend itself against modern fighters. The Japanese army essentially said that, hey, we can still rely on these machines for the upcoming operations, which, I can see their motivation in trying to spin it this way, since they still have a lot of these aircraft types in service, but that really is pushing it just a little bit. The comparison flights between the Ki-44 and the Bf-109 were perhaps the most important for the Japanese army, because if the Ki-44 fails against the Bf-109, then the Japanese army then knows that it's in trouble, because this was one of their up-and-coming fighter aircraft in development, and it's already been under severe criticism by some parts of the Japanese army's air service, especially the Akeno Aviation School. The speed and maneuvering performance of both models are equal. The Ki-44 is superior in climbing power and the Bf-109E is superior in diving performance. Judging from this, the Ki-44 has the performance to compete with the Bf-109E if the pilot's skill is similar. The side which makes the best use of the characteristics of the aircraft wins. Here Captain Ishigawa said, "The Bf-109E has nothing of merit compared to the Ki-44 in terms of performance." Captain Aramaki said, "It can be said that the Bf-109E is no different than the Ki-44. The German Willi Stör said, "If you can fly this plane, Japanese military aviation will be the best in the world." The Ki-44 had been heavily criticized, and much of this seems to stem from sort of the overall expectations and part of the Japanese Army Air Service had in stressing maneuverability and sort of close-in dogfight performance in machines over sort of the high-speed, fast passes, boom and zoom sort of combat approach. That is not to say that the Japanese were completely unfamiliar with that sort of combat, the high-speed combat, or that they didn't care about it. The fact that they actually want to see how the Bf-109 performs against their own machines actually shows you that they were quite open to this idea, and their upcoming fighter designs were also going in that direction. But still, there was an institutional bias on some areas, it seems, that stressed sort of that maneuverability and the old way of thinking, or the old school way of thinking, which is actually something that was quite prominent in a lot of nations before they entered World War II. With this test now, and with the comparison flights that they were making, they actually realized that the Ki-44, well, with this aircraft, they had quite a solid platform. And following that test, the criticism, or much of the criticism that was leveled against this machine, sort of evaporated and disappeared. And they realized that they actually had something here that could work for them. And the Ka-44 was thus slotted to take a greater part in the upcoming sovereign operation. The Ki-44, which was severely criticized by the Akeno Aviation School as unable to be used as a fighter for overly emphasizing high-speed performance, was washed away of its stigma immediately after the evaluation of its simulated air battle with the Bf-109. From this point on, the controversy of Akeno's flight school negative opinion of the Ki-44 disappeared, and the evaluation of the Ki-44 turned 180 degrees. The comparison between the Ki-60 and the Bf-109 was also really cool because both aircraft were actually using the same engine. And the Bf-109E used the Daimler-Benz 601, and the Ki-60, and also later on the Ki-61, used the licensed-built version of that very same engine. There is no big difference in speed performance between the two. It seems that the Ki-60 was slightly inferior to the Bf-109E in acceleration. For climbing performance, there is no difference in rate of climb, but the Ki-60 may have better climbing performance in a zoom climb. The Bf-109E was still superior in diving acceleration. The Ki-60 had a slightly superior turning performance. The Ki-60 was assumed to be able to compete with the Bf-109E, which was good news for Japan because it meant that while this was still reliant on a foreign inline engine design, their own aircraft designs were on par with what they were seeing in different nations. However, the Ki-60 was not put into production, and much of this stems probably from the fact that it still during this stage had quite a few problems with the design, and also because it didn't really give the Japanese anything extra or anything they really thought they needed at this point. And the Ki-60 was supposed to be sort of a heavy fighter, a heavy single-engine fighter, but with a lot of firepower and used as a high-altitude interceptor, which was really not the focus for Japan at this point, it seems. And thus the Ki-61 was put into production instead, because this also was more suited to sort of the air superiority role, the local air superiority role that the Japanese army assumed it needed in the upcoming operations. So having had a look at all of that, I find this really interesting. You know, it's fascinating to see how different countries have completely different conclusions. They test in a different manner, have their own reasons and their own justifications for the conclusions that they have. And personally, I think it's, you know, looking back at the test, I do think it's a bit cheeky of them to say, oh yeah, the Ki-27 is still in there somehow. You know, it still really feels like they were pushing it on that point. Against modern machines, I really don't see it being that capable. But of course, you also got to remember that not all of the machines that were in the area in this, you know, Southeast Asia and in the Pacific regions that the Japanese were facing, not all of those machines were the most modern types either. Let's look at the evaluation of the Ki-44, the Ki-44 and the Ki-60 here. I think this seems fair. You know, the Ki-60 of course did not materialize. Instead, we had the Ki-61 with the same engine as the Bf-109E as well, and it actually seems that it was overall on paper slightly a better performer than its German cousin there. But yeah, I hope that all of you enjoyed that as well. I found this really, really fascinating. Tell me what you thought about this in the comments below. You know, is this so new to you? Is this information something that you didn't know before? Are you surprised by some of the things you saw? Did it correspond with what you knew? And also, again, I just want to thank Quaz here for having translated a lot of the documents there out of the Japanese language and having written me, you know, a superb summary and submitted these translations. Absolutely fantastic. And if you enjoyed the video, please also show your appreciation to a fellow viewer down in this comment section below. I'm sure he'll be very happy to see that as well. And if you have enjoyed the video, please also consider supporting via Patreon or channel memberships to support the channel and make videos like this one possible. And I also keep having people ask me where they can get some of the aircraft models that they see in the background of my videos. I've recently partnered with Air Models, so if you want to spice up your living area, you know, whether that's your office space like here for me, whether that's your bedroom, your living room, your bathroom perhaps, you know, any room could use a fighter jet, am I right? Yeah, check out the affiliate link down below, and any purchase is not just going to give you a nice little aircraft to decorate your space with, it's also going to support the channel. And as always, I wish all of you a great day, see you on the next one, and see you also in the sky.